Welcome to our midday session, which is called Busting the Myths of the Independent Schools Admissions Process. It's a bit of a mouthful. My name's Ed Vasey. I'm comparing a lot of the sessions today, and indeed I did yesterday as well. And I want to introduce our two speakers. First of all, we've got Andy Mayfield, who is the Director of Admissions at St Paul's. And I wanted just to cite him first because I have a child at St Paul's, so if it ends up with just a conversation between me and Andy, completely excluding Vicky, you'll understand why, because I'll obviously be using the next 40 minutes to drill down into why my son isn't doing better at St Paul's. But anyway, our other guest is Vicky Bingham, who is the head of South Hampstead High School, who is fresh from raising a substantial sum of money last night at a dinner for bursaries for her wonderful school, which is 4 to 18. Obviously, St Paul's is 13 to 18. And we're here really to talk through the admissions process into independent schools. And as you've probably worked out, I have been through it with my son and indeed with my daughter. And I can say it is a pretty fraught experience, particularly if you are in London. It's a massive logistical exercise. But it's also fraught with lots of rumours and perhaps misinformation about how schools actually approach the admissions process. So this is a chance to hear from the people in charge of the admissions process at two schools, but also for you to ask them questions as well. So let's start with Vicky. Tell us just, the floor is yours as well. What is South Hampstead looking for? What is the truth and what are the kind of myths that you hear about from parents who are thinking about South Hampstead?
So South Hampstead, for those of you who don't know it, it's in northwest London, and we're also part of a big family of schools called the Girls' Day School Trust, with schools across London and indeed the country. We are an academic school, so fundamentally we are looking for academic potential. But I think what's really important about that is we are also looking for girls who are going to be happy in the school and thrive. And I suppose one of the myths I sort of come across is that parents feel they just have to get their child into what they perceive to be the very best school. And the conception of what represents the very best school might be driven by things such as league tables or what they might have heard on from their friends. Just going on reputation, and actually what it really should be about is what school your child is going to thrive in. And I think if your child is very heavily tutored and gets into a school by the skin of their teeth, and hopefully the schools will have done their job and seen beyond any intensive preparation, well, that's not necessarily going to be a happy place for that child. I think it's really about finding a school which is going to be right for your child's character, your child's academic abilities, where they can really thrive and where the school can really bring out their potential. So what we're looking for is not just academic ability, but also, I suppose, a certain kind of spark and curiosity is how I'd put it. We're looking for girls who are interested in learning, who ask questions. We're also interested in girls who are going to throw themselves into aspects of our huge co-curricular program. We're looking for girls who are kind and are going to, sort of make lifelong friends. I suppose what I would say is we're not looking for a particular type, though, and we don't want one type in our school. We want students with lots of different characters and interests, but I suppose what they have in common is a sort of innate curiosity.
Good afternoon. I'm Andy Mayfield, and as Ed said, I'm from St Paul's School, which is a large independent day school. It's academic selective and it's in southwest London. And if you ever watch the boat race on TV on BBC and you watch the helicopters fly over London, you go, oh my gosh, there's lots of green fields. I thought it was central London. There's not meant to be any green fields down there. Well, when you get to halfway, that's where St Paul's is, underneath Hammersmith Bridge, all those green fields there. There are playing fields right next to the river. So as you probably imagine, yes, we do a little bit of sport at St Paul's School, and we're very lucky to have lots of playing fields around it. Admissions at St Paul's. Yes, we're a big day school in London, like a number of other big day boys' schools in London, and lots of people apply. I suppose the big myth that I would come out with, having said all of the, would be numbers. You're all probably sitting there thinking numbers applying at 13, at 11, at 7, at 8, at 16. How on earth do you get in? And I would say governors also say this, and parents and members of the Old Pauline Club who are present actually in the room. They often say, gosh, well, so many people are applying to your school. It must be really oversubscribed, and it's very, very difficult to get in. And in actual fact, when you look a bit deeper and probe into it, I always sort of say this to them, it's a matter of not how many people apply, it's a matter of how many people apply that are right for the school, and how many of those people actually want to come to the school. So in actual fact, I can say there are 500 children that apply, say, at 13 plus. But how many of those are actually right for the school, and how many of those are actually going to come when they're sitting with offers from other good schools that may be closer to where they live and may offer something that's more appealing than St Paul's offers. So numbers, don't always get bamboozled by high numbers. Select the right school for your child, and then they'll have a better chance of getting in. So that's my big myth, I say, that's out there. There's lots of other myths out there that's sort of to do with boys' schools at the moment. There's the big 11-13 myth, and we might come round to talking about that later on. But I'll also say, like Ed, I've got 3 children. I've been through this process with them. 3 of them went to independent schools in London, and one of them went, actually, in fact, to a school quite close to here. She went to a state school in Parsons Green. So, and they all went through the 13 plus, but they all end up at really good schools. They're all really happy now, and they've all had a very good education. So my second myth that I'm heading to is there are lots of people here today. There are an awful lot of schools down there that have all got places that they want to fill. When your children go to these admissions events and they go into an exam hall with thousands of other children, they come out going, it's so hard to get in. But you know what? The following day, they'll all go to the same school, a different school, sit in the same hall with the same kids, and sit another set of exams and go, gosh, there's a lot of kids here today. And the following weekend, they'll go and do exactly the same with the same 1,000 kids, all sit the same exams. And at the end of it, when the music stops, there's enough chairs for everybody to sit down. They won't all be sitting on the same chair at the same school. They'll all be sitting in different schools, but there are enough chairs at the end of the day when the process stops. Just to add a bit more colour to that, we sat our 16 plus process last week, and we had about 100 boys sitting exams for us. And when I sort of chatted to the boys over morning break, as they were busy taking a break between, I don't know, doing chemistry and physics, I said, so what are you doing at the weekend? And they said, we're off to such and such school to sit an exam. And I said, what are you doing on Sunday? And they said, well, actually, we're off to another school to sit an exam because we couldn't sit their exams today because we're sitting your exams. What did you do yesterday? We sat an exam at this school. And they suddenly realised, in actual fact, all the kids around the table had all been in the same exam halls. They're going to all be in the same exam halls for the next 3 or 4 days. So it's a lot of the same children sitting a lot of the same exams at different schools. And when the music stops, as I said, there's chairs for everyone to sit down. I'll pause there.
Fantastic. So let's address one elephant in the room, which is tutoring, which I think Vicky mentioned in passing in her opening remarks. My kids were at a state primary school, and we did get them tutors, and I think we got them tutors not necessarily because we thought we could give them an advantage in terms of knowing extra stuff, but in terms of just being used to the exam process and the interview process. So is it, are you being a terrible cheat if you get a tutor, or are you just preparing your kids for what is, as Andy indicated, quite a grueling process if you're applying for a lot of schools?
Yeah, I think tutoring, well, the fact that we have a tutoring industry speaks to the issue which Andy was just talking about, which is, in effect, an artificial competition. It's a competition which is created by everyone being, understandably, worried about getting their child into their preferred school, and that drives the tutoring industry. Really, if we all agreed as parents to just stop tutoring, then actually it would be better for everybody, but we're never going to achieve that. So what do I think about tutoring? Well, I have spoken about tutoring in the press, and one of the things I said was that although it has its place, and it can be very beneficial for some children, I believe that children who are tutored for a very long time don't necessarily learn the skills they need to be independent and academically resilient. They might if they have a really great tutor who understands that their job is ultimately to ensure that the child flies on their own. But I think it can encourage a bit of sort of micro-step thinking. So that's why I'm not a huge fan of it. What I would say, though, is that I suspect that, my advice, if parents ask me, shall I get a tutor for the 11 plus, is I say, well, we've got familiarisation materials available on our website. Don't send your child blind into the exam room. They need to have done, in my view, a little bit of preparation, just so they understand the format of the questions and have some sense of working to time, because you don't want them to be entirely thrown. But so I think familiarisation rather than over-preparation over a number of years is my message. I think then you're getting into the sort of territory of marginal gains. And, all our schools are working really hard to try and design tests which I wouldn't claim that they are tutor-proof. I don't believe that any test is entirely tutor-proof. But they are designed to try and sort of get beyond the tutoring and assess innate potential. And I really think that over a certain point it is very marginal. So it's about a bit of familiarisation. We're really conscious of the fact that children will have had different levels of preparation from their schools, anything from, quite a bit in a prep school to nothing at all in a state primary school. And we're really conscious of that during the admissions process, and we pay attention to that.
Andy.
Now, I'll reveal something from my past. I went through the state education system, but my parents did put me in for an independent schools selection process. And I can tell you the school isn't here because I've walked around the base down there. They're not actually here today. But I went in at 11 plus from a state primary school and sat a half-hour exam in Latin. I learned everything on the school notice board that was next to me, but I didn't answer any marks in the school Latin paper. I didn't do particularly well in the French paper either. So, and I never really thanked my parents for that wonderful opportunity to go and sit 2 exams where I couldn't do any of it. So I'll park that point there and then come on to the next thing. I mean, I think we're all in here, we all agree that as parents we want the best for our children. And we want them to have a good education, a sensible diet of extracurricular things, but also have fun and have friends and have a good social life. And as parents, we've got a responsibility to do that. I'll park that. If you are at a school that you're paying for the current education, and I teach at one of those, my responsibility is to make sure if your children come to my school that I prepare them properly for GCSEs and for A-levels. You're paying me money to basically do that, so we will do that as a school. We'll take responsibility for that. If your child is in a school, obviously a junior school or a prep school, and you're paying for the education, part of their job will be to prepare them so that they are ready to sit assessments for senior schools. You're paying money for them to do that. They should be doing that competently. And most boys' prep schools will prepare them properly for common entrance and scholarship, and they're now doing likewise in year 6 for these assessments to senior schools. Of course, so that means you shouldn't really, on top of that, need a tutor. And if you're a parent, you'll say, in actual fact, they're doing enough at school. They shouldn't be doing more out of school. They need to be doing other things out of school and enjoying their lives. So the only situation where you might consider a tutor, and this is where parents, you've got a real job on your hands to make sure you get the healthy balance right, is if you're, like I was, at a state primary school and you're then putting your child forward into an independent school admissions process, making sure that they're prepared to do it, making sure that you're not throwing them in at the deep end and they're going to drown and swim, and they can't swim when they go into a 45-minute exam, but make sure that they're familiar with the questions that are going to be asked and they can do them to the best of their ability. But this is where you've got to use your judgment. If you decide to actually educate them beyond that and try and train them into doing something that in actual fact rote learning it and trying to get to the highest possible level, you've got to ask yourself your question, are you trying to put your child into the right school for them? Or is it a school that in actual fact you would like them to go to and a school that you want them to go to, and you're doing the driving here, the child's not doing the driving? So it's a question of making sure that you get the balance right. Because if you get it wrong and you get them into that school that is academically perhaps a bit too quick and the volume's too high, the tutoring will have to continue, because once the scaffolding's there, we take down the scaffolding and they start that school, the house can fall down. And yet, here I come back to that life balance, because if they start at a senior school and they can't keep up, you're likely then to be trying to add a little bit of extra tutoring along. And then you're saying, well, actually, have I got the balance wrong in their lives? Because instead of having time to do other things, now they're at the wrong school. I pushed them too hard, over-tutored in the wrong school, and now I can't get a decent life balance age 13 or 11 to 18. So it's quite important for you as parents to make sure that your child are supported through the process, but they're not overly tutored to the point where they get into the wrong school. That's why getting the right school, the right pace of education for your children is absolutely crucial.
Excellent. So lots of nodding along there. And I want to now ask about the interview process, because obviously if your kid gets through the exam, and quite rightly lots of parents say, the exam is obviously important because that helps the schools decide who they're going to interview. But so parents, I think, are slightly perplexed about the balance between getting their child through the exam and then how important then is the interview. So I'd love your insights into the weight you put on the interview process.
Okay.
And also, obviously, the rigorous training for the child to get through the interview.
Yes, please do not prepare your child for the interview. The child that comes along with a sort of 5-year strategic plan for their life is a bit of a red flag. Or the child who clearly has had, sort of a lot of intense debates with their parents to prepare them. We can spot that a mile off. So please don't do that. Our interviewers we pick them. We make sure that they're friendly. We always ask a question which is nice and easy to start with. It's a question which anyone can answer, no matter how nervous they are. And the idea is to ease them into the interview before we start challenging them a little bit more. What I would say, certainly for us, we're an academically selective school, is they need to have done well in the assessment, in the entrance exam, to get to the interview stage. So that's the sort of the baseline. And that remains important. It's not that you sort of pass the test for us and then it's all on the interview. That's not how it works. It remains a holistic process right until the point where we decide to make an offer or not. And it's 3 key things. It's the entrance exam, and that will remain, pretty significant in our thinking. I'll be honest about that. The school reference, which provides a wealth of information, and it is really, really helpful to us because it gives a holistic picture of a child over time rather than on any particular day. And then finally, the interview. So why is the interview important? I think it helps us to spot the child who maybe, has done well on the exam, but not necessarily absolutely blown it out of the kicked the ball out of the park, but really, really shines in interview, seems quite comfortable, sort of applying their knowledge in unfamiliar settings. It's also good at giving us a sense of whether they will fit in well with the school, whether they'll enjoy it, whether they've got interests. And so it does still form part of our academic assessment. It's not just a sort of lovely, friendly chat, although the students do come out saying that they've really enjoyed it. So I think my key message is please don't prepare your children for the interview, because we really can tell when they've been prepared. They're sort of formulaic answers. And we really try to help them settle in and enjoy the process. They should leave the interview feeling that they've had a really good conversation about them, about their interests, and doing some sort of kind of questions that they've never really thought about. The other thing we do, so just here's perhaps a myth, we change our questions every single year. And we do that because we know that what happens is the children leave the interview and they go back to their prep schools, and their prep schools ask them, so what happened at the South Hampstead High School interview? And so we mix things up every single year.
So I have to say this lesson is going very well. I've never seen such an obedient and rapt class of pupils with people taking notes. Andy, what are your views on interviews? So clearly my decision to spend 3 years at the gates of St Paul's interviewing children as they came out of their interviews was a mistake.
It was, Ed, because I changed the questions depending on who's sitting in front of me. So, I mean, there are various boys and girls here in the audience. I almost want to go and start interviewing them and show them the kind of questions that I ask, but I won't. I'll spare you. But, I mean, the first question one would ask is, what do you enjoy doing most? And the answer could come back, playing with my pet tarantula. Oh, my gosh. Or my pet snake. Oh, well, that's interesting. So what do you feed your snake on? Oh, we feed him on this, that. Why? How many times do you feed him? Has he ever escaped? If he did, where did he go? So you're more interested. So our interview, in actual fact, I should say, is crucial. It's the central part of our admissions process because you can get all these numbers from maths tests and verbal reasoning tests and non-verbal reasoning tests and English tests, but it's all very formulaic. What we're looking for is children that are going to, as Vicky said, thrive in our school. And our school teaches lots of other subjects apart from English and maths, and we don't teach verbal reasoning and non-verbal reasoning at St Paul's either. So we want to find out, what do you know about history? What do you know about science? What do you know about history, science, geography? How do you relate? So we will ask you questions. Say history. What have you been studying in history? We'll put it to you. And somebody might say, we've been studying, say, 1066. Well, that's very interesting. What happened in 1066? Well, lots of people ran around the country beating various armies, and then they all ended up down in the south coast in a place called Battle, aptly named, I suppose, fighting the French. And the French are at the bottom of the hill, and the British army at the top of the hill. And then what happened? Well, the English kept charging up and down, and Harold stood at the top, and then Harold got one in the eye, and that was basically the end, because nobody was going to stop the English army racing down the hill. So the French came and slaughtered them. So, my question would then be, so what would happen if Harold hadn't got it, if the person behind Harold had said, Harold, your shoelace is undone. He'd gone down, done his shoelace up, and the guy behind him had got the arrow in the eye, and Harold stood up and said, don't go down the hill, chaps, stay at the top. And then we're beating the French. How would England be different then?
This is the quality education I'm paying for.
This is it. And then the question is, hang on, Ed, the question is, did the boy actually listen in history? Did he actually, in fact, take into effect of, well, the French came here and they completely changed all of our laws and all of our systems. They built castles. The whole feudal system came through the French being here. So if the French weren't here, then how would things be different? So did he actually understand the context of the history that he'd been taught? And could he actually, in fact, answer the questions? So it wasn't the tutor, the history teacher might have taught him lots of things, but could he actually think and use the information that he had in his brain? I'm after, can he analyse? Can he synthesise? Has he got curiosity? Has he got creativity? Those are the things I'm finding out, because those are the things that are going to be important in the classroom if he comes to my school. Will he thrive? Will he have an interesting question? Will he be able to think of the next line in the argument that's coming? Will he question what the teacher just said and put on the board? Will he be able to use his knowledge? So that's the things that we're after, not really, can you do some more English, can you do some more maths? What kind of person are you? And when I'm talking about football, I want to know, what does a centre forward do? Why does he do that? Where does he pass the ball to? What are the challenges a centre forward faces? I'll be talking to him about his musical instruments. Which hand's more important? This hand, the left hand, or the right hand? How do you get different notes out? All of those things about, do they actually think during their daily lives? Do they think about where they live? What would they change in their current environment of where they live in London? There you go. So what are they thinking? Are they a thinking human being? Are they being stimulated by things that are happening around them all the time? That's what I want to know, because they come to the school. I've seen they've got good numbers. They'll be a great addition to the school, and they'll be a good, interesting person to have in a classroom, and we've very much enjoyed teaching them. So the interview is absolutely fundamental in the part of our admissions process. And I have, just like Vicky, I have a hand-selected team of friendly teachers that are really good at starting on a basic level and building up to those more difficult questions to find out where the limits of the boy are. And I'm afraid, Ed, the questions change every day depending on who's in front of us and what their experiences are.
Brilliant. So I'm going to ask one last question, then I'm going to throw it open to the floor, because you're all here to hear directly about your particular concerns. And when I take questions from the floor, I may designate one person on this panel to answer them, because sometimes, I want to get as many questions in as possible. But my final question, which is more sort of reflective for Andy and Vicky, is one of the things that kept me calm during the whole process was the adage that the school chooses the pupil, which I think is quite a good thing, because I do think you want your child to be at the school that's right for them. And I really wanted just them to reflect on the tension, I think, that exists between the parent who is fixated on a particular school, and if my child doesn't go there, I've failed as a parent, and the opportunity to listen to the child and work, as it were, with your child to find the right school for them.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think this process is harder in a way for you as parents, than it is for your children. Children are remarkably resilient creatures. And I think one of my best pieces of advice for all of you is, even if you are anxious about the admissions process, and I understand that, although I return to Andy's point that there are not hordes of children wandering the streets of London without a school to go to. That doesn't happen. But even if you are anxious, do your very best not to let that rub off on your child. And the way I'd suggest you do this is try not to talk about it too much. If you talk to them a lot around the dinner table about which school they want to go to, and if they want to talk about it, that's fine, because they're driving that conversation. But if you engage them in conversation very regularly about this whole process, that process will potentially grow in their minds and become a really big deal. So try and keep it light. I mean, one of the things I say to parents is, if your child is auditioning for the school play or the school orchestra, don't make that your opening question when you collect them from school. How did it go, darling? How did the audition go? Because what you're actually signaling to the child is, this really matters to you. And yes, you're trying to keep your tone light, but your child knows that this is important to you. So my best piece of advice is, just try to talk about other stuff at home. And if your child wants to talk about which school they really enjoyed visiting and which school had the best cookies, because that seems to be the major concern of 11-year-olds, and that's entirely healthy, actually, then let them talk. But try to just talk about normal stuff as well. And you do the worrying internally and just let your child continue being a child.
Very sound advice, I have to say. And just echoing on that point, I remember when my child didn't get into a school that I thought she would be really ideally suited to. I remember her turning around to me, Dad, it really doesn't matter. And I was more devastated myself when I opened the envelope in actual fact and found she hadn't got into the school, because it was the one that I wanted her to go to, but it wasn't the one that she wanted to go to. And it took me a while to really adjust to that as a parent, but it is a hard thing to do, so sound advice. The one thing that I would say is, when you are considering schools for your children, do listen carefully to the advice of the schools that they're currently at. So apply to a range of schools, so that you do, in effect, there is an aspirational school, there is one that you really think is a sensible school, and there is a backup school as well. Talk to your school, your current child's school. Talk to the head teachers, talk to their teachers, and also talk to other people that you know within the community about where their child go, so you get a good feel for the right school for the right school for the right child. That's the key thing, and be set on that. Don't let your wants and desires trump that. Get your child at the centre of this process.